Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for this feature screening of Changing the Game, which concludes our Pride series with Georgia Equality. And I'm so happy that you all were able to join us tonight for a screening of the film and also to join us for a conversation. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Craig Hardesty. I'm the board chair of Out on Film. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Chanel Haley from Georgia Equality, who is going to have a conversation with Sarah and Alex from the film. And I will go ahead and let all of you get started. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Craig. So let's jump right in because I have a lot to talk about here. We are down to 25 minutes. So let's start off with you, Alex, as the producer, but then also as working for GLAAD. Can you kind of tell us how the film came about and your role within this as a producer / GLAAD? I'm not really understanding the mesh there.
Yeah,
for the film.
So 3 years ago, or around 3-4 years ago, I was working at GLAAD as the senior strategist for transgender media. And for those who don't know, GLAAD is the nation's leading LGBTQ advocacy organization. And in my job at GLAAD, I work with content creators and storytellers on how to tell authentic and accurate trans stories specifically. And as a trans man myself, representation has always been so important. And it was actually a coincidence that I was about to leave my job at GLAAD to produce some films when the director, Michael Barnett, cold called me and said, hey, I'm really interested in transgender stories and specifically in athletics. Like, is there a place for a story like this? And am I the person to tell it? And as someone who works in media and who is very cognizant of who is telling whose stories, I was a little hesitant. But then I met Michael Barnett and Claire Tucker and immediately knew that their goal in making a film like this was to give these athletes their stories to tell from their own voices and perspectives. And what I love about the making of this film was that both Michael Barnett and Claire Tucker really invested in the trans community and asked for our input, our guidance, listened to our direction when there were things that we would sort of pull back on and pull in on. And all of this came about because Michael Barnett, even as the socially conscious, progressive guy that he is, and he's a filmmaker, he did not know how to be an advocate or an ally to someone in his own life who he knew he would need to be there for the rest of his life. And so this was his way of stepping up as an ally, which is in educating himself and creating art that does service to underrepresented communities. And so I became a producer in just informing how the stories ended up appearing on screen and connecting with these amazing young people who are heroes to me.
And Sarah, as one of the young people that was on the screen, do you think that it was done well? Do you feel you like the way you're portrayed? Do you feel represented?
Definitely, most definitely. It was funny, the first time I saw this film, I did not know that they put old content of me like vlogging and stuff like that on my old YouTube channel. I was like, oh God, that is me, like my young self, like not knowing what I was doing at the time. And I look so, I don't know, young and adorable and kind of weird, but it was amazing to see how this whole documentary came together, and I think it came out really nice.
Are you still vlogging and still practicing makeup?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, so, since we have you here, Sarah, let's talk about you first, because I found yours so relatable, but even today as an adult, because you was advocating to your General Assembly about changing these laws for the state, and then you had a success there. What prompted you to even go that route? Because most people your age would have just been like, too intimidated to actually go up into, like, when it comes to changing a law. It's one thing at your actual school or, on your SGA, but, you was up against adults and then you won.
I think my public speaking really started when I was in 7th grade, when I came out as trans in front of my 80 plus course students, like my 80 plus course class. And I think that just really prompted me to think, like, oh, this is something that I really, really want to pursue. And I think going into the legislative realm and stuff like that, that just kind of came in and then, like, did its thing. And then here we are now. So I think it just kind of, I don't know, it wasn't really me being like, I really, really want to do this. It was more like, here's an opportunity for me to speak and have my story be known to other people, and telling my story, how I have overcome all these things, and that it's not just me, but it's so many more people in New Hampshire. So I think that's really how it happened, was it just kind of weaved into my life, and it's here. I'm advocating whenever I need to.
Alex, so when looking for some youth to participate, were there other youth that was maybe thought of, however, didn't have supportive parents? Because, everybody in this film had supportive families, which obviously makes it a little more easier than obviously a youth that would not have a supportive family.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at a lot of different youth across the country, and we worked with Chris Mosier, who is a USA team athlete who has a vast network of young trans athletes that he works with. And ultimately, the young people that we chose to be in the film, we ultimately made some tough decisions about who we felt would feel empowered by having their stories on a bigger platform. And for some people, they weren't in the place. They were vulnerable, if not having the support in their community, maybe not in a place that they wanted more spotlight on them. I think for Sarah, she's someone who so clearly, if she wants to pursue it, just is an advocate by nature, is a public speaker, is someone that likes to connect with people. But I love seeing the difference between Sarah and Mac and Terry and Andrea, because they all have very different ways that they've had to approach advocacy. For someone like Mac, he just wanted to wrestle. He did not want to become a voice for the community. That was by coincidence, and he stepped into that moment. And in the same way, Andrea and Terry, I mean, their story is beautiful, because you can see in real time what representation means, in that Terry needed to see Andrea in order to be Terry. But in the same way that Mac was sort of forced into the spotlight, the same happened for Andrea. And you also see the differences in how Andrea approaches the way she advocates and lives versus Mac. I mean, what I love about all the different young athletes that we featured is they are so different in every single way. And yet it's amazing to me to look at the young people who, not necessarily by their own wants and wishes, step into this advocacy and know that it's the right thing to do. But we always talk about, when we have these screenings, no one should have to be this brave to be themselves and to participate in sports. So to answer your question, there were many that we considered, and the few that we ended up putting into the film were people that we saw as benefiting and getting life and light out of the platform. And Sarah, you can speak to if that's true or not.
Yeah, before we go on, Alex, I wanted to ask Craig or Jim if we have anybody that has questions from listening.
One of the questions that has come up is, have you kept in touch with everybody, and what are the people in the film doing now?
Well, I'd say sporadically in touch, not deeply in touch like we used to be, but in touch enough that we know what each other is doing on a daily basis, which is nice. I think I was with Mac Yeah, it was Mac, Terry, and Andrea. We both met up in New York for the Tamron Hall show, so that was really nice to see each other. But ever since that last encounter, I haven't seen anybody like in person, but I have kept in touch with social media and stuff.
And yeah,
We've talked. Go ahead, Alex.
and I've kept in touch with all of them for one reason or another. Sarah is not going to talk about all the wonderful things she's doing, but now, fortunately, I've come back to GLAAD after a year or two off, and I get to work with all these young people in how they want to advance in their advocacy and tell more stories, because I just think they're awesome people.
So looking at how different each life was, and for how they accepted and dealt with the attention they were getting. As a, where you work for GLAAD, as one of the producers, working in advocacy, as a trans person yourself, Alex, do you think that maybe just the best policy, or even advocating for that there should just be a mixed gender sports, and so we could just remove the segregation of sports, period? Or do you still think it should be segregated, but then only allowing person plays with the team that they identify as? What do you think the best policy should really be when it comes to this?
It's a really
you can chime in also, by the way.
It's a really great question. I don't know that I have the answers. I don't work in sports regulations, all that. What I do know is that many more people are not identifying as male or female, boy or girl. And so the sports industry, the sports community is going to have to reckon at some point with the fact that gender is not binary in the way that it was set up to be. So I don't propose to know the answers. What I love about the film is it asks a lot of questions and leaves the audience with a lot of answers to reckon with themselves about. But ultimately, I think we need to come to a place where we put inclusion first. When we're talking especially about young people and kids, we need to figure out how everyone can be included, and not just included, but welcomed.
Yeah, I also want to add on how I like going through high school and being on all different types of teams. I noticed that all these teams are these kids' families. Like these teams that kids are on are essentially their family that's away, like they're home away from home. And I feel like if we just if we recognize it as that, and that sports is something that is life-saving, because I know it saved my life. And I think we need to recognize that, and that when we're discriminating against young adolescents for their gender, I think that's obviously pushing us back, and it's obviously not something that should be happening, because it's quite frankly disgusting. And I think we need to just see it as a whole picture, as somebody, as a person, rather than their gender or how many chromosomes are in their body.
And I'll just add real quick to what Sarah said. As someone who works in media and at GLAAD, the narrative that I kept seeing, and the reason why I had to unlearn a lot of what I'd internalized as bias, is because there are only specific narratives that raise to the top. And if we notice and think about when people seem to care about trans athletes, it's when they're winning. It's usually when they're Black or brown. It's usually when they're trans feminine and a woman. Like, these are systems we have to interrogate and ask ourselves, why are we thinking the way that we are? And is there anything behind these? And so that's something that I've been really passionate about in sharing this film with people. It's that there are so many stories of young trans people participating in sports, participating in public life. And if people are only making an issue out of it when trans kids are winning, we need to talk about that. That needs to be something that we're all discussing. And we're not going to get into all the science that basically debases all the mythology and all the the misinformation, but I think we really have to be critical of how we're thinking about things and where our thoughts and ideologies come from.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most disgusting thing was about how the bullying was from adults. I mean, that scene where, Mac wins the second station and the way the crowd booed, I mean, he couldn't even enjoy his win because of how disgusting these grown adults were treating him. I mean, it was despicable. And so that takes me to, what about what's happening in Texas? Where are we at now with Texas changing? Because again, about his story, particularly interesting is that Max wanted to play on the men's team, on the boys' team. The parents wanted Max on the boys' team. So the only discrepancy was the state saying no, but it's like, but this is what everybody wants. It's not inconvenience for anybody. Why can't you do it this way? So is there any movement there around this? I know there was an issue with the Trump administration, so where are we at now with Texas in 2020, and where hopefully this doesn't have to happen again to another trans person?
As far as I know, in Texas, they did have this up for another vote, and they kept the law in place as it is. So people are still mandated to participate in sports based on their birth certificate. And there are numerous legislative battles happening across the country. I mean, in Idaho, on Trans Day of Visibility, there was a bill that was passed basically granting people sports teams the ability to investigate girls' anatomy to make sure that they are the gender that they say they are, which is so disgusting and so violating, not just for trans people, because what the implications of this is that anyone that is performing in any way that seems to not be perfectly conform to a certain gender, or even overperforming or winning, like, they will be subject to this invasive bodily violation. And that's what we're facing around the country right now. And what I really want to sort of hone in on is that we as a queer community need to be paying attention to this specific subject, because this is how opponents want us to be divided. This, they think, is a very easily exploitable issue that they assume will unite people against trans people's humanity. And so the reason we all need to be showing up for yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of being divided, Sarah and Mac's parents, well, Sarah's parents specifically said they were conservative, but Mac's grandparents said they were Republican. So I'm just, how does this, in your household, Republican controlled administration who is explicitly rolling back, ending laws, or doing things that is explicitly against or that harms the trans community, how do your parents fall into this? Yeah. What, to support that administration? I mean,
I think for my parents, it's hard because they know that Trump is putting all of these rollbacks on LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. And I can definitely I can see with my parents that it's really hard for them to see that happening to me. And they have their beliefs. I have my beliefs. They may not match, but I like to educate them on like matters that may not be part of the trans rights and stuff like that. But I think we're all on the same page when it comes to Trump attacking the LGBTQ community. We're obviously divided on other views, but we're all together on trans views and LGBTQ rights and stuff like that.
And I'll just add too, I think one of the interesting things about the film is showing that you know, there's a lot of assumptions about the queer or trans community, that we are somehow a monolith, that there aren't different belief systems and ideologies within the families that we grow up in, whether or not we're supported as trans. And the thing that I really think was powerful for a lot of people to see when we've shown this documentary across the country is Republicans and conservatives being able to see that there are people like them who find it within themselves to accept other people, and that this can go beyond politics. I have my own political beliefs, but we need to really push politics aside and come back to what are our values? What do we believe in? What is the society and community that we want to live in? Because I think a lot of conservatives and Republicans would also agree that what we're living through right now is not it. And so I'll just add in, I think it is powerful to see people of similar communities and ways to relate and to model allyship, and that they may not look all the same. I may not agree with all of them, but I think there is benefit for a lot of people to see that there are ways to reconcile what may seem contradictory.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. Hey, Craig or Jim, is there any more questions that came in?
Yes. So how has the film been received at the festivals that you've been?
It's been received overwhelmingly positive. Not in my wildest dreams did we expect this to be the case, just based on even my own discomfort with the subject matter. But I think the young people, including Sarah, who share their stories so openly, so vulnerably, and in not trying to be anything that they're not, it just goes to show that storytelling really can change hearts and minds. And we've just been overwhelmed with support from around the country. We've screened it in Indianapolis, in Nashville, Georgia. Now I'm naming cities and states. But anyway, the reception has been overwhelmingly positive, and also something that's so impactful for me to see too is that it's not only in LGBTQ film festivals, it's also been in festivals not directed at the LGBTQ community. And I think that's so important right now in terms of, you know, obviously there's so much content out there, and we're sort of primed to self-select what's already going to confirm what we believe or don't. And so it's been really powerful to see people, again, have 180-degree turns when they see the film, that trans people are valid and deserving and enough to participate fully in public life.
Yeah. I think it's just been amazing seeing how it's not only adults, but it's a lot of young adults and teenagers who are seeing these films. I think the first time I went to was Mountain Film before Telluride? I mean, no, what? Tribeca. Okay, yeah. So going to Mountain Film was really eye-opening for me because there were so many young faces there. It was based out of their high school. High schoolers were there doing reviews and judging like all the films, and it was amazing seeing all these young faces, and especially having them coming up to me, Mac, Terry, and Andrea, saying like, you guys are amazing people, like you guys have done so much for the community and like their lives, and it was really amazing.
Well, so how do people get to see this? It's amazing, Alex. You know, don't have distribution. How can someone see this film past the 24 hours?
Thank you for asking. That's a great question, Chantal. Currently, we're still trying to figure out distribution, but it does help for you to spread the word on social media. So I'm the one that runs the social media. So if you want a message, reach out and connect with any of us. It's me behind the little handle, and it's Changing Game Doc. And please tell your friends about it. Tell your family, tell whoever's in your community to follow. We do post updates about screenings, and hopefully we'll have some good news soon about distribution and ways that we can share the film with the world.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So I'll let Craig take it over from here down to our last, but thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex.
Okay,
welcome.
thank you, Chanel. And Alex, can you just for the remaining minute that we have, you're talking about the distribution, the word of mouth. For our stories, for right now, for trans stories in particular that are about trans people, that have trans people in these films in terms of both trans roles, can you talk about the importance of word of mouth and for all of us to talk about this film as much as we can, what that means to getting recognized and represented?
So you cut out a little bit, but I think I caught most of it.
Okay.
What I'll just say is that it is so important for underrepresented communities and people to have the means to tell their own stories. And so when we're looking at the trans community specifically, and we've for so long not been able to control or have agency over our own narratives, supporting stories and filmmaking that are from us, by us, is so critical, and not just about the trans community. There's a quote that I want to cite that the disability community coined, and it says, "Nothing about us without us." And I think we're at a moment right now, culturally, where that has to be the standard. If there is anything about us, it must include us at high levels of leadership and direction and steering and all of those things. And so we need more stories and films like Changing the Game. There's another great film that I also produced. It's on Netflix. It's called Disclosure, and it will show you the 100-year history of trans representation, or what I think is more accurate, misrepresentation in TV and film, which has largely been about the projections of who trans people are and who trans people of color are and who all of us are without our participation or perspectives. And I think no longer can we accept that as the storytelling that we want and need.
Thank you. And yes, everyone should check out Disclosure on Netflix. It's a beautiful documentary, and it is very well done, and I encourage everyone to check that out. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Alex, Sarah, and Chanel, thank you very much. From all of us here, we've enjoyed this series with Georgia Equality. And for all of us here at Out on Film, I hope that you have enjoyed this series. I think that we picked some films that were, I think, important, and not the usual fare that you might see at other screenings. And so we hope that it's given you a broad representation of our community in its entirety. So at Out on Film, we produce a film festival that is by, for, and about us, that tells our stories as only we can tell them. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting queer film. Thank you for supporting queer arts and queer people. And I hope that you have a wonderful long weekend and that you will join us in the fall for a festival. We are going to be running September 24th through October 4th, and we are going to bring you more stories like the one that you saw tonight, that represents all of us and tells the entire story of our whole community. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Are we ended?